Last week I did a lot of gushing over Xenoblade Chronicles X, but there was one thing in particular I mentioned that ended up having a lot more significance on my final assessments than I realized when I wrote it. I said I was undecided on whether I liked this game or the original Xenoblade better, but that the last few chapters may help to sway my opinion one way or the other. Those last two chapters ended up having a lot more weight than I expected on my final opinion. But before I jump to conclusions too soon, I really want to let the experience settle and examine it from as many perspectives as I can. One thing that I find vital to constructing good criticism is completing any analysis from as many unique points of context and perspective as possible. I'll actually go as far as to say that it would be pretty pretentious and certainly a bit pompous to assume that one's own singular experience with a game this large would garner an all-encompassing understanding that gives the foundation and place of authority to declare with any confidence that a game is good or bad. So I really want to reach out to as many other players as possible to see what you all thought of it. I'll go ahead and use this time to give a minor spoiler warning. I'm not going to show anything here that would ruin the story by any means, but I do want to discuss the final boss battle, so while I won't be showing the boss's name or giving any context to that fight with cutscenes that lead up to that moment, I will be showing some of the fight itself. So if you don't want to see spoilers of that nature, you'll want to click away, but I'll warn you right before I get into that, so you don't need to click away immediately. If you don't mind spoilers of that sort, however, I promise I'm not going to be spoiling the story at all in this video, so you can watch without fear. You might want to avoid the comments though, as I can't really control the kinds of spoilers you might find there. Alright, now that that's out of the way, I'd really like to get a discussion going in the comments, and in particular I'd like to hear from anyone who's finished Xenoblade Chronicles X. Let me precede all of this with an important statement. In this video, I'm going to be analyzing some of the features of this game that I really don't like. That doesn't mean that I disliked the game, however. For the most part, I really did have a blast with it, but there were many gameplay mechanics and user interface issues and quest design choices in particular that just really dragged down what was otherwise an incredibly fun experience. The first gripe I have with this game is that it's just bloated. Let me give some background on where I'm coming from with this. I've been playing video games now for nearly 25 years, and it's been both frustrating and saddening to see how the industry has evolved from a more or less niche hobby into a mainstream multi-billion-dollar business. This evolution has led to certain flagrant trends so obviously implemented by corporate executives that most AAA games released these days contain literally nothing of substance despite all the boasting of the enormous scope and fully realized worlds. You see, the problem is, as the industry grew and competition became more and more fierce, the need to make the gaming experience bigger was always the answer. And the expectation of players for larger and larger experiences quickly outgrew what was reasonable for development teams to provide in any acceptable time frame. The result is that while these AAA developers promise to deliver adventures more massive and more expansive than we've ever seen before, and no less on completely asinine annual release schedules, what they actually end up offering are shallow, empty, and lifeless worlds that contain nothing but busy work. All these features add nothing to the meat of what the experience is, and the only reason they're there is because a competitor had that feature in their game, so now it's expected for everyone to do it regardless of whether it strengthens the themes of the game or not. And when I say themes, I'm not just talking about literary themes, I'm also talking about gameplay, because the two are not mutually exclusive, but I'll save that topic for a future video. The point I'm driving at here is that a lot of big budget games suffer from being bloated with unnecessary content. It's like there's some quota for it that they feel they have to reach so that the marketing team can proclaim with honesty that the game contains more than X amount of hours of gameplay in their sales materials. Once you sludge through all of that marketing BS though, what you're left with is a lot of lifeless lists of objectives that contain no real value or satisfaction. Xenoblade Chronicles X, and to a large extent its predecessor, is filled with this kind of content. Hundreds and hundreds of fetch quests, all falling into the gather 10 of this totally random item, or kill 5 of this kind of enemy quest. I wouldn't be attacking the game so aggressively for this if it weren't for the fact that for many of these quests, the game doesn't even try to help you narrow your search. It'll say something like, find 5 amount of X item in Primordia. Do you even realize how long it would take me to traverse the entire thing on foot looking for where this random item you need is randomly generated? In both of these Xenoblade games, they have these blue orbs that can be found like every 10 feet it seems, just scattered freaking everywhere in sight, which are nothing more than randomly generated collectible items. These items serve no purpose in the game other than to give to NPCs so you can finish a quest or put into the Collectopedia, which I'm still also struggling to understand the purpose for. Now hold on, those of you who have played the game might be saying. You can also use them to generate new equipment. While that might technically be true, I've played this game for well over 100 hours, constantly going out of my way to pick up these blue orbs, and not once did I find enough of these items to successfully craft a piece of equipment with, because the requirements for them are freaking ridiculous. So I stand by what I said. This gameplay mechanic of going around and picking up blue orbs, a feature that has no sensible world-building application, serves no purpose whatsoever unless you want to waste 500 hours of your life picking them up. Again, I wouldn't be picking this feature apart if by doing this mundane, stupid task, I was rewarded with valuable equipment or lots of money to buy it with. But you get neither of those things, and that's largely due to how offensively overpriced a lot of the equipment in this game is. Which leads me to my second gripe. A lot of the most valuable equipment in the game is offensively overpriced. Let me ask you something. Why should one piece of armor cost nearly the same amount of money as a level 30 skill? What is the justification for that? Let me repeat that I'm talking about one single piece of armor, not an entire set. So much of this game's equipment is just outrageously expensive, and for seemingly no reason. I've read on forums online that most people just found their equipment as part of loot drops from the monsters they killed, and that worked for me throughout the early and mid-game, but when it came to the late game, that method just didn't cut it at all. I was forced to buy equipment that matched my level if I had any chance of beating some of the really tough story bosses. But in order to afford it, I had to leave my game on overnight and throughout the day while I worked, and let money accumulate through Frontier Nav. Now I understand that there are ways to optimize Frontier Nav to make lots of money, but the problem is you have to have research probes in order to do that, and you can't buy probes in this game, at least as far as I can tell, and I looked everywhere trying to find a place to buy them. You have to salvage them in the world, but you don't get research probes from salvaging wrecks or archaeological finds. You get them, for some godforsaken reason, from biological salvages. The problem with this is that in order to even engage in salvaging any of these structures, you have to level up either your mechanical, archaeological, or biological field skill, but you can only do them one at a time, and only after you've increased your blade level, which takes forever to do. The game never informs you that the research probes can only be found in biological salvages, so I focused on the mechanical field skill in order to plant more probes, but that didn't do me any good because I had no research probes to place on them, which means I couldn't accumulate money fast enough to buy any of the ridiculously overpriced equipment with any regular frequency. This kind of leads into my next gripe, which is with the user interface. To be brief, it's just not very intuitive. There's very little about this game that you can just pick up and instinctively understand. And this is coming from a veteran Xenoblade player. God help whoever picks this game up without having played the first one, because my knowledge of the previous game's battle mechanics were the only reason I had any clue what I was doing in the early game. This game does a really poor job of explaining its features. It does have an expansive manual that you can read to learn about all of it, but to me that's nothing more than a cop-out for not being able to design clever quests to teach these mechanics in a balanced way. Instead of showing you what to do, they want you to open a freaking tome and read the information instead. Because in an interactive medium that features robust visual and audio capabilities, the best way to teach the player is to make them read a manual. Now that I think about it, a lot of this game's most satisfying content is hidden behind this kind of mundane, pointless content. Before you can start any story mission, the game forces you to complete a number of side quests. In order to unlock skills, you have to do just the most annoying, long, boring, pointless side quest ever. And now that I'm talking about it, I've realized that most of the game is like that. anything that you want to do is preceded by something trivial, boring, or otherwise shallow. Did you guys notice that? Am I crazy here, or is this ringing true for any of you? Alright, here's the last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is the part that I was warning about earlier, so if you don't want to see the final boss, click away now. I'll wait a couple of seconds. Alright, basically, the final boss is an example of the laziest kind of game design. In essence, the game made you work incredibly hard to get a skill, and once you did all of those requirements, it was so satisfying to traverse the world and fight in one that I never wanted to get out of it again, and there was really no reason to. You can take on enemies much higher in level than you once you leave your game on long enough to buy all the coolest weapons, and after all that time putting together 4 formidable skills, the final boss just wipes all of that hard work away. In one form, it puts up a shield that makes it invincible to your attacks while it regains health. In another form, it has a move that completely depletes your skills of their fuel, rendering them completely unusable. Why? Why would you do that? After all of that time, after all of that preparation, you take away the best part of the game, the most fun element in the game's most climatic moment. Why? There may be some of you who think this is a good thing because it forces you to put together a well-prepared ground team for the final boss, and I'd like to hear your opinions on that. But at the moment, it feels like a cop-out for lazy boss design. Instead of making a tough boss fight for the skills, they just decided to take your skills away. They decided to restrict the player, again, as they had done so consistently throughout the game, rather than give the player freedom to fight the boss in the way they wanted to, and designing a boss that would provide challenge for any playstyle. To me, this is very unfortunate, and likely due to the fact that so much time was spent including all of this pointless side content that's so rife in this game. And I hate that big game development is trending towards this kind of unfocused experience. Instead of spending the time necessary to balance the game's most critical battles and narrative moments, they instead chose to include 1,000 worthless fetch quests. Instead of teaching the player how to play the game through clever, well-designed quest structure and seamlessly integrated tutorials, they decided to include unnecessary online features. They did this not because any of it contributed to a strong, focused, and unified experience, but because all of those things are expected from AAA games nowadays, and I hate that this is what big-budget gaming has become. Look no further than Shadow of the Colossus or Journey to understand that a game doesn't need to be bloated with unnecessary features in order to feel large and expansive. And dare I speak the grossly overused buzzword, epic. These games needed none of that garbage to deliver experiences widely considered to be bursting with value that justified their price tag. These were masterful works of art that were laser-focused and wove gameplay and narrative together into a complete artistic package that felt perfect for what their themes required. Xenoblade Chronicles X is not an experience like that, and it's just a shame to me because it has so much potential. So much potential, but the developers willingly restricted all of that because they felt they had to compete with all the other big boys. And I just feel like that's the wrong approach for big RPGs like this, and for any game for that matter. I don't buy and spend hundreds of hours of my life playing video games because I want every possible trendy feature that exists in one place. I play games because they have the potential to be the most meaningful artistic experiences on the planet if the publishers would just stop for 2 seconds and understand that cramming busy work into a game doesn't make it more valuable. I want to hear your thoughts though. Why am I wrong? Please let me know. I want it to be said that the community I'm trying to build here on the channel is one of open-mindedness and tolerance of everyone's opinions. I always strive to keep an open mind and assume that my position is grossly misguided, and while I'm not perfect at that, I have had my opinion changed several times by my viewers, which I'm really grateful for. So have at it in the comments and let me know what you thought about these features in Xenoblade X. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll see you guys again next week.